At first light, right before the sunset, beheld with my own eyes. Ah, but what a blessing. It's a new moon, the first crescent. We gon' share some mirth and some gladness. Ain't nobody stressing. Look, I was too focused on the ways of men. Had to refocus, turn my ways to him. Let's get it right, we ain't afraid of men. The kingdom is the goal, and yes, we aim to win. Our fathers watched to see the month begin. There must be light to see what's groping, trying to make it in. Father, forgive us for this sin, cause we didn't know no better. Glad our fathers kept a record, this cannot be severed. Not the conjunction or the fool, it was in those letters. Not one jot, no one tittle, by the law we fed it. We'll probably get the kingdom faster if we work together. Glorified and it will never.
We celebrate.
Yo, Big Bo.
The real
Yo.
When we celebrate. And I want to take the opportunity right now to say all praise be to Yahweh, Bahasham, Hamashiach, Yahweh. I'm going to say that one more time. All praise be to Yahweh, Bahasham, Hamashiach, Yahweh. And we bless. The spirit of one of my dear brothers, Zabak, I want to say, and we gonna do it. Check it out, this is how we gonna do it. On the count of three, I want y'all to say, Shalam Yasharahla. 1, 2, 3. Shalam Yasharahla! Go ahead and drop it, baby. New moon. It's a new moon.
And y'all know what it is. Another Willie Main production.
Beheld with my own eyes. Ah, but what a blessing. It's a new moon, the first crescent. We gon' share some mirth and some gladness. Ain't nobody stressing.
I tell my Akim Shalom as we pour around the drinks. We could look up in the sky and know exactly what he thinks. It's a new moon, a celebration. The Kaaba or the Trula that's before me is the only temptation. Tonight we do it right, so call up all the tribes to see my fifth shot like the book of Deuteronomy. Hey, these laws are part of me, and I get ruled with wicked Jews like Nehemiah. You gon' have to pardon me. Just look at what we built together. Our haters probably couldn't imagine the better successor. But all praises go to Yah, cause we don't worship men. You know that Jake's always late, let them brothers in. A holy feast, so you know we came dapper down. Menorah chains, yellow diamonds with a golden crown. Yeah, how was shy, got our hand, he ain't gon' let us drown. We get it cracking once you hear them trumpets sound.
At first light, right before the sunset, beheld with my own eyes. Ah, but what a blessing.
I just gotta let you know that you've been so good to me. And I know that I can't do it by myself. I need your love so desperately. It's been times I wanted to give up, but your words, they spoke to me. Fill my spirit, help me to believe, but sometimes I still get weak.
I need you to fill me up, until I overflow. The keeper of my way. I need you to fill me up. I need your love always. The keeper of my way. I need you to fill me up. I need you. I need feel me, say.
If you feel me, say yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let me hear you say yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I need you to fill me up, fill me up, until I overflow. Keep her on my way,
keep her on my way.
I need you to fill me up, fill me up.
Lord, I
need your love always, so I won't go astray. The keeper of my way.
You're the keeper of my way.
Ain't no ghetto without us.
John Dummy, John Dummy, no gon' kill it, no gon' kill it.
Revelation 2:9. Tell them.
Yeah, all my brothers, yeah, we rich shock. We got the truth, we come from rich stock. That's on my tribe, I never flip-flop. Thy kingdom come, now watch it TikTok. We got this truth and now we rich We headed back up to the tip top. Menorah golden, watch your drip drop. We in the hood, but now we rich yeah.
My folks stayed in the Hoovers, I was born in the trades. I was raised in the hundreds, but I ain't never joined the gang. Affiliated, I was with it, I ain't played no games. Wasn't banging, but I had to show I ain't no lame. Copperworth Entertainment, yeah, I did my thing. Until I woke up to this truth and found out we still slaves. Niggas killing over colors, time to rise up for our brothers. Time to unify our hustles, time to lead our baby mothers out to lay like Nazareth. I was raised up out the gutter, for the homies I got locked up, not a word I never uttered. So for Yasharahla, yeah, you best believe I'll die. This ain't Christianity, you best believe I'll
all my
ride.
brothers, yeah, we rich shock. We got the truth, we come from rich stock. That's on my tribe, I never flip-flop. Thy kingdom come, now watch it TikTok. We got this truth and now we rich We headed back up to the tip top.
We rich.
Menorah golden, watch it drip drop. We in the hood, but now we rich yeah.
Reclining my seats, I'm looking at the stars. Not too long ago was blowing kush about the car. Always wanted fame until I found the 12 stars. But now a nigga rich, the wisdom got me hella far. Looking back on my life, this shit is so surreal. Like I came up on the lotto, how a nigga feel. Keep the law as the motto, now tell me what's the deal. Riding smooth, diamond chain, compliment the wheels. Yeah, that's how we pull up fly. If my brothers got an issue, then I bet I ride. Even if I take a loss, you can bet I try. Cause I'ma get a couple off, and that's before
yeah,
I
all
die.
my brothers, yeah, we rich shock. We got the truth, we come from rich stock. That's on my tribe, I never flip-flop. Thy kingdom come, now watch it TikTok. We got this truth and now we rich We headed back up to the tip top. Menorah golden, watch it drip drop. We in the hood, but now we rich yeah.
It's so cold in these streets, I take the heat outside. I keep a sword like Cephas, just believe I might. Ain't an army on this earth that could see these tribes. Dressed in warlike apparel, best believe we fly. It's time to get the doctrine right, it's time to feed these sheep. What we sow into each other, that's what we gon' reap. Shit, you niggas claim you bout that life. Some niggas banging for the set, but I'm an Israelite. He full of pride and full of shit, then I'ma cut him on sight. IQ ain't never gotta tell me twice. I'm a soldier for Christ, and Mashiach the king is not to be mocked. I love my nation, but 2/3 of y'all can still get popped. Blah.
Desire one Ariala. Yashamai. Yasharahla.
Not the third. Yeah. block spinning. New bride and my gold fringe match the presidential inside. Ray-Bans on my eyes. We done bruised in charge. I don't know why they still be looking surprised. Add fuel to my fire, take it higher than they ever seen. My life a movie and I'm living out the best scenes. They call me cocky, in reality I'm confident. And every night we taking shots to our accomplishments. A lot of food, put it on my plate. And baby pressing out to tell her to wait. She seen the signs of the times and the world is so boring. I'd rather pull out the old schools and new foreigns. Tell me what you want, I'll tell you what you need. Them other niggas stuck, Bruce took the lead. I'm teaching on them streets that I used to run. And afterwards chilling with my Aki on. What's up? Jake's claiming that they own. And they crew is legit. I see the things that they doing when they do it, but they don't do it like this. Not at all. Niggas say that they the bomb, and they really be lit. I see the things that they doing when they do it, but they don't do it like this. Straight game, money over fame. Put it in accounts, double the amount on some Oprah shit. On occasion we be toasting, and what I'm sipping now the same color as the ocean is. Ride slow with the beat up, sister got her feet up. Head wrap with a skirt on when we meet up. It's really a play, my vibe reading South Central LA. And yeah, we got it cracking from the streets to the bay. All praises to Yahweh when I kneel and I pray, knowing it's all good. I teach truth and spread light in the hood, doing exactly what we want, they only do what they could. Common sense is genius dressed in his working clothes. It's like I work and work more, y'all just working clothes. A lot of bad attitudes and some broken souls. The city of fallen angels, guess that's how it goes. Damn. Jake's claiming that they own. And they crew is legit. I bet. I see the things that they doing when they do it, but they don't do it like this. Niggas say that they the bomb, and they really be lit. I see the things that they doing when they do it, but they don't do it like this. True Nation.
Shalom, Israel. Welcome back to another edition of Bible Basics. My name is Shalam, and to my left. Shalom, Israel. Welcome back to another edition of Bible Basics. My name is Shamarya, and to my left, and tonight we are going to be going over the first and last king and high priest of Israel, right? AKA Malak Chazadak, Melchizedek. So let's open up with Psalms chapter 76 and verse 1.
Book of Psalms, chapter 76, verse 1. In Judah is God known. His,
Go ahead.
his name is great in Israel.
Verse 2.
In Shalam also is his tabernacle and his dwelling place in Zion.
In Salem, right? So it says in Salem, meaning Jerusalem, right? So just giving that little bit of context that Salem is also Jerusalem because that's where his tabernacle is established and his dwelling in Zion. Go to Psalms chapter 110. Stay in Psalms, flip over to chapter 110. And let's start at, actually start at verse 1.
Psalms chapter 110, verse 1. The Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou at my right hand until I make thy enemies thy footstool.
Read down to 4.
The Lord shall send the rod of thy strength out of Zion, rule thou in the midst of thy enemies. Thy people shall be willing in the day of thy power, in the beauties of holiness. From the womb of the morning thou hast the dew of thy youth. The Lord hath sworn and will not repent. Thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek.
So Melchizedek, right? So there's his name, right? And what that translates to is the King of Righteousness, Melchizedek. So when we see Salem and Melchizedek, we see these things and we see this being mentioned, but then it comes to the question of, well, who is the King of Righteousness? Who is that speaking of? And there's also a lot of Israel kind of misunderstands things, right? Oftentimes, Jakes will think that one person is another person, who's another person, who's another person, but those things aren't validated through scriptures, right? They're not validated. A lot of regeneration, a lot of speculation. Even some men will go as far as to say, well, I'm not only just of this tribe, but of this specific household. I'm of this lineage. I'm this prophet, and bold claims, but you see things that are actually verified in the scriptures. You say you are a priest after the order of Melchizedek, after the order of the King of Righteousness. So, who is Melchizedek? Who is that King of Righteousness? Who is this that's being mentioned and that's being referenced in the scriptures? So let's go over to Genesis chapter 14. Back to the beginning. Chapter 14, we're going to start at verse 18.
Book of Genesis, chapter 14, verse 18. And Melchizedek, king of Salem.
So there it is again, right? Melchizedek, the king of righteousness, king of Salem, which we know is Jerusalem, right? So Melchizedek, king of Salem, go ahead.
Brought forth bread and wine. And he was the priest of the Most High God.
So he was the priest of the Most High God. Now this was long before, this was even before the time of Israel, right? Us being the children of Israel, we get our name from our forefather Israel, right? Who was formerly known as Jacob, right? One of the patriarchs of our nation. So, but we know out of Jacob came who? Levi, right? Loya, which was the tribe, which means joined unto the Most High. That was the tribe that the Most High would separate of the people of Israel to be, and it was actually specifically of that tribe Aaron's sons, and of his sons, out of his 3 sons, how do I say that? Each one of the lineages of his son had a different role within the priesthood. They were chosen for specific roles within the priesthood. One of his sons was going to have, all of his children were going to have this occupation. One of his sons, they were going to be this, and one of his sons, they were going to be that. They had different roles, right? So this was before the Most High had ever made Jacob Jacob was born, before Levi had ever hit the scene and his name being recorded and he existed in the mortal plane. And this was before there was a priesthood or a Levitical priesthood in the nation of Israel, because Israel didn't even exist. But there was a priest prior to that time, way back, right? Way back. And he's speaking to, this is even before Abraham being known as Abraham. At this time, he was still Abram. Go ahead, read it from the top of verse 18.
And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine. And he was the priest of the Most High God.
And he was the priest of the Most High. Go ahead. Read down to verse 20.
And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered my enemies into thy hand. And he gave him tithes of all.
And not only was he a priest in the order of, him being a mediator, but he was also receiving tithes. So that same structure of priesthood was already established before there was Levites, right? Before there were the sons of Aaron, there was already a structure of priesthood that was set up. And this man's name was Melchizedek, meaning the king of righteousness, king of Salem. He was already there. And Abram, who was Abraham, was paying tithes to this Melchizedek. Let's go to John chapter 8. So who is this man? Who is this man? He's mentioned a number of times, but who is he really? What spirit or whose spirit is he? We're going to start at verse 52 and we're going to read down to 59.
John chapter 8, verse 52. Then said the Jews unto him, Now we know that thou hast a devil. Abraham is dead, and the prophets, and thou sayest, If a man keep my saying, he shall never taste of death.
So they were speaking to Yahushua, right? Of course, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, every opportunity they got, every word that they could try to catch him up with, every accusation that could be made, they tried to place that on Christ. And that's why the scripture said, he was afflicted and stricken in the sight of man. They didn't think the Most High was with him. They're like, who is this? This, out the hood, he coming out of Nazareth. Probably didn't have much. It said he had a comeliness that no man would desire. Comely means to be beautiful. Like Songs of Solomon 1 and 5, he says, I'm black but comely. So it literally says that Christ didn't have any form of beauty that people would desire him. And it's crazy because I kind of get irritated in a sense, but just kind of one of those things that we understand about the world. So many people have a platform with all these different platforms to go live on, right? Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitch. So many people go live and everyone's opinion is validated because they have a platform. But oftentimes what you see is not really who has the best message gets received, and not even who has the best spirit or the best character, but who is the most visually appealing, right? How many people have been exposed and come out to be wolves in sheep clothing, come out to be hypocrites, come out to be, liars, or whatever the case may be, not even true to their own cause, that they're boasting and preaching so proudly, but so many people were accrediting them, so many people endorsing them, they had amassed such a following simply because they had some level of physical attractiveness, right? But Yahushua wasn't like that. And so every time that he was doing these things, there was nothing that they were, not only did he not have the comeliness, but because of the doctrine that he was teaching, they were trying to catch him up, right? They was like, man, we know you got a devil. Abraham is dead. Go ahead.
Art thou greater than our father Abraham, which is dead? And the prophets are dead, whom makest thou thyself?
Go ahead.
Jesus answered, if I honor myself, my honor is nothing. It is my Father that honoreth me, of whom ye say that he is your God.
Go ahead.
Yet ye have not known him, but I know him. And if I should say, I know him not, I shall be a liar, like unto you. But I know him and keep his saying.
Woo! So he was, he was letting them have it, and that's why you see. Yeah, that's what you can see, why they were so cut to heart to the point where they wanted to kill that man, because he said, man, he said, if I honor myself, that's not going to mean anything. But he said, it's the Most High. It's my Father who's honored me. He said, the same one that y'all say is your God, right? He said, yet you haven't known him, but I know him. And he said, if I say I don't know him, I'd be lying, right? He said, I would be like unto you. Go ahead.
Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad.
So then he says, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day. Go ahead.
Then said the Jews unto him, thou art not yet 50 years old, and hast thou seen Abraham?
So Christ was speaking of very spiritual things, right? In so much that even his own apostles and his disciples would have to come to him sometimes and be like, hey, man, what did that mean? And they understood certain things, obviously. They had levels of understanding. They were going out and teaching. But he would speak so eloquently and so spiritually, but that even they would need to be given that understanding. So as the multitude is gathered around him while they're speaking to him, he says, he saw Abraham, or rather Abraham saw him in his day and was glad. And he's like, man, you're not even 50 years old. Not even that old. You're a young man. What do you mean you saw Abraham? What do you mean Abraham saw you? And, that's why they was like, man, he got a devil. He got some kind of spirit on him. Who is this man? Who is this dude? What are you talking about? Go ahead.
Jesus said unto them, verily, verily, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am.
He said, before Abraham was, I am. So that's what Yahweh was acknowledging. Basically, he had already existed before Abraham was born, before the patriarchs and the chosen lineage and all those things. Because, not to go super far into it, but remember the scriptures say that he was the Word was with God. And when the Most High was speaking in Genesis, let us make man in our image, right? Multiple people or multiple people being spoken to or being referenced, right? So he's like, man, before Abraham was, I am. Go ahead.
Then took they up stones to cast at him. But Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple, going through the midst of them, and so passed by.
They got so angry at that, they was like, man, they was about to try to kill him, and he had to leave. Go to Revelation chapter 22. They was getting ready to kill him for the things that he was teaching. 22, and let's get verse 13.
Revelations chapter 22, verse 13. I am Alpha and Omega.
I'm sorry, let's start at verse 12.
Verse 12, and behold, I come quickly, and my reward is with me to give every man according as his work shall be. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last.
So this is speaking of Christ, right? Because he says that he wants the righteous to be fellow heirs in the kingdom to come, right? He says, behold, he says he's coming quickly. His reward is with him to give to every man according as his work. He is the first and the last, the beginning and the end. Let's go over to 1 Samuel. Because we're seeing that, right? So Melchizedek, right? We see in Genesis, Melchizedek, king of Salem. He's referenced in, Psalms. He's referenced in Genesis. Then we see Christ speaking, saying that, look, I was there with Abraham. But Christ is who to us? King, right? He's the King of kings. Our people are called kings, right? We'll be kings in the kingdom to come, most high willing, but Christ will be the King of kings. So when he was saying that he had seen Abram, he was like, hey, I was there back then. And they couldn't understand what it was that he was speaking of. But that was Yahweh Shai. What I have you get? 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel chapter 8, start at verse 4.
1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 4. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together and came to Samuel unto Ramah. And
we're going to read down to verse 8.
And said unto him, behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations.
So Samuel the prophet, right? He was a prophet, but he was also judging a lot of the matters in Israel in righteousness. So when Samuel had sons and they were brought up, people were kind of hoping, well, they've been raised, right? They know the law. Hopefully they're going to be like unto Samuel, but that wasn't the case. So when the people realized that that wasn't benefiting them, they came to Samuel. They said, look, you're too old to be able to take up the mantle and do the things that you used to be able to do. And it's pretty obvious that, at a certain point, very few men haven't seen death. You getting older, you it's going to be your time soon. He said, the people were calling for a king to make a judge, but they said, like all of the nations, they wanted someone to rule over them like the other nations had kings, like the other nations, like what they had seen basically. Just like how Israel always gets seduced. We see the other nations, how they're living. We see a sinner's wealth. We see things that seem to be great. They seem to be beautiful. They seem to be enticing, and our people get taken in those things. And this was one of those instances. Go ahead.
But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to judge us." And Samuel prayed unto the Lord. And the Lord said unto Samuel, "Hearken unto the voice of the people in all that they say unto thee. For they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them."
He said they haven't rejected you. They don't have a problem with you. If you were any younger, they would have gladly put you back in that position or allowed you to, have that authority. But when our people didn't realize the significance of what it was that they were asking for. Because first and foremost, there is someone who sits in the position of king, right? Yahweh Shai is the King of Kings. That is the King of Israel, right? Then the Most High Yahweh, that is our God. And that's why oftentimes you might see Lord, or like what we read in Psalms earlier, the Lord said unto my Lord, right? You'll see instances like that, and then you'll also see sometimes where it's specified the Lord thy God, where it's specifically speaking of the Most High God Yahweh, right? So they were speaking, Samuel went and prayed, and he was like, man, Samuel, go ahead and give them what it is that they want, because they haven't rejected you. They have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. Our people didn't want the things that we have been offered. They didn't want the spiritual things that we've been offered. They didn't want the covenant and the style of and the manner of authority and rulership that has been set up, but we wanted to be like all the other nations. He said, they've rejected me. Go ahead.
According to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even unto this day, wherewith they have forsaken me and served other gods, so do they also unto thee.
He's like, man, they've been doing this. And that's the thing. A lot of times we can look at the relationships. While the magnitude is typically different, there are certain parallels that we see in relationships, right? Between a man and a woman, between a man and Yahweh Shai, and between Yahweh Shai and the Most High, right? There's across all three of those relationships, there's a parallel in the sense of authority, right? A man is the head over the woman. The Yahweh Shai is the head over the man, and the Most High God is the head of us all, right? You see parallels in the leadership, in the authority, in the judgment, in the interaction, even in the sake of love, right? The Most High said that he was married unto Israel, and in Jeremiah 6:2 says he likened Israel as a comely and delicate woman, right? And then you also see the relationship, the dynamic. Most High going hard for Israel, right? Defender, God making sure that everything was taken care of, giving really gifts. When the Most High made it rain manna in the wilderness, that's like a gift. Going above and beyond for someone that you love. That's typically what a man does in a relationship, right? The scriptures say in the Apocrypha with the three wise men, a man will toil and do everything that he's doing and come and bring it to the woman. Most High was our God, with Yahweh Shai being our king, the king of righteousness, the king of Jerusalem, and that was rejected. It was like you can only imagine after all of this time, because this was fairly early in Israel's history, right? Look how much more Bible there is left where Israel continued to play the whore. Israel continued to serve other gods, continued to rebel against the Most High, continued to be disobedient. It's like, man, Most High is very merciful with all of us. And Yahweh Shai literally gave his life so that we had the opportunity to be able to come back to the Most High as that righteous and living sacrifice. But he said they didn't reject me. They didn't reject you, they rejected me. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 7. It's a lot, man. Sometimes it's just kind of mind-blowing to read those kinds of things. As we have a limited scope of understanding, because the scriptures say wisdom with man is foolishness with the Most High, meaning that the Most High is just so far above what man can comprehend. Is really no measuring or understanding the magnitude of not only his power and authority, but also his intelligence and his wisdom, right? And then you see with us, with man being made in his image, how we're a glimpse of the Most High, a fraction of him. Some of the attributes that us as men have that, kind of drive us in a similar way, right? A man can get jealous over his woman. The Most High says he's a jealous God. Not jealous according to what the world has come to understand. Quadazar is slim. Man, he don't even have to work out. I'm jealous. No, it's not. That's not what that's talking about. It literally means, one of the definitions of jealousy is specifically a feeling of, actually, let me get it for y'all. Let me get it, because it specifically speaks of something that belongs to you, you being jealous over that. I remember reading Coming Out of the World, like a jealous guy, like, what do you mean? What does the Most High have, or what does the Most High want that we have? It says, this is the one that people understand it to be, right? It says, hostile toward a rival, or one believed to enjoy an advantage, envious. His success made his old friends jealous. That's the most common definition of jealousy that people come to understand. But this is more so, after that, more so what the scriptures speak of. Intolerant of rivalry or unfaithfulness. It's like, man, if this is supposed to be mine, however could there be a rival? Is that not insulting? You ever had a woman you interested in? It's like, oh, I'm kind of also, what? Or a woman you're actually already in a relationship in, and you're at a certain level of commitment and a certain level of understanding, it's like, man, it'd be an insult. It's like the ultimate betrayal. Something go bump in the night. Who got to get up? Who got to be brave? Who got to, strap up the boots? Who's going to lay their life on the line? And then there'd be some kind of unfaithfulness? Oh. Most High was there. He set up all these things. He created the world for our sakes. He prepared a kingdom for us. He has prepared everything, of course, righteously to our wildest dreams, things that the scriptures even say that it hasn't even entered into the heart of man to understand what he has for us. He gave us a little bit. Hey, all I'm going to tell y'all is the streets is gold. Whoa! The same gold that brothers is hustling and working so hard for now, so proud to be able to wear and to flaunt and to show. The same gold that's very expensive and hard to come by. The streets will be made of gold. We say in the hood, the streets is dirty. Don't nobody regard the street. I ain't never seen somebody be like, oh man, I gotta relieve myself real quick. Oh, I don't want to do this on this nice street. Ain't nobody thinking like that. People leave all kind of dirt and grime and muck and fluids and whatever on the street. Imagine the streets are gold. So the Most High is doing all these things for the sake of Israel. And then look at in the wilderness. Look at all the wars, how Israel has been defended, right? Israel has been defended in all these wars. Most High will put the spirit of fear into the hearts of our enemies, allowing Jakes to go and slay hundreds and thousands, 10,000s. All these things for Israel to be capable of, just for Israel to be unfaithful. Most High had a fire, a floating fire going before the children of Israel in the wilderness. Confounded our enemies. Sent plagues amongst them while we were perfectly fine and taken care of. Did more than enough. So it's just, those kinds of things. Like, that's why it's just, when he says they have rejected you but rejected me, it's like, man, imagine how, that really must have made him feel first and foremost. And then also the level of patience to still allow Israel to come back and to have some kind of understanding and to have some type of opportunity at the salvation that he prepared since the beginning. Hebrews chapter 7, let's start at verse 1. Chapter 7.
Hebrews chapter 7, verse 1. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom also Abraham gave a 10th part of all, first being by interpretation king of righteousness, and after that also king of Salem, which is king of peace.
So it said that Abraham gave a 10th part of all. He gave his tithes, which we mentioned earlier, that same structure of priesthood that was set up with Melchizedek, the king of Salem, the king of peace. Go ahead.
Without father, without mother, without descent.
So real quick, who could that be, right? Without a biological father, without a biological mother, without descent, right? When you say descendants, like I can say I'm my grandpa's descendant, right? Came through his lineage, came through his loins. says this man, he's without father and without mother and without descent. Right? Go ahead.
Having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like unto the Son of God, abideth a priest continually.
And he's abiding a priest, meaning he's a priest continually. Go ahead.
Now consider how great this man was, unto whom the patriarch Abraham gave the tenth of the spoils.
So he was like, man, just consider how great he was, because even Abraham was giving a tenth of his spoils. Go ahead.
And verily they that are of the sons of Levi, who receive the office of the priesthood, have a commandment to take tithes of the people according to the law, that is, of their brethren, though they come out of the loins of Abraham. But he whose descent is not counted from them received tithes of Abraham and bless him that had the promises.
I'm just real quick. We're going to read down to verse 12.
And without all contradiction, the less is blessed of the better. And here men that die receive tithes, but there hath received them, of whom it is witnessed that he liveth. And as I may so say, Levi also, who received tithes, paid tithes in Abraham.
So he was saying, so he's breaking all these things down, right? He's speaking of Melchizedek after his order. He's speaking of how even Abraham was paying tithes to him, right? And he says, man, you know, I may even say, or as I may so say, he said, Levi also, who receiveth tithes, paid tithes in Abraham. Like, well, what does that mean? Read on.
For he was yet in the loins of his father when Melchizedek met him.
Stop right there. So he said, man, I mean, that when I read that, I was like, wow. Because there's a whole lot to decipher from that, right? First and foremost, it says that Levi, who's receiving tithes, has paid tithes. Well, how is that possible, right? Well, how does that work if he's a receiver of tithes? How was it that he's able to pay tithes? Because tithes originally was set up to be to sustain Levites first and foremost, because they weren't supposed to have to work, you know, regular 9 to 5s. Their focus was supposed to be on the ministry, the teachings, the oracles of the Most High, the workings of the temple, all that kind of stuff. Across the board, all the things that go into the temple, from keeping the menorah lit, because it had to be lit continually, right? From keeping the menorah lit to offering the sacrifices, all the sacrifices that Israel had to bring in every time that there was someone who had sinned and they had to bring in an animal, someone had to be there to take care of that, right? Someone had to be there to offer that animal up to the Most High, and it wasn't no assembly line production kind of thing. That had to be done by hand, and there was a specific way to kill animals. There were specific organs and things that the Most High wanted, and there were specific things that man then could eat. There was, specific incense that had to be burned. So you just have to think, there must have been quite a system set up within the Levitical priesthood so that all these things could be sustained. So while all those things are going on, Israel would bring tithes, which was a tenth of everything that they had to be able to sustain Levi, right? So he's like, as I may say, so Levi also, who receiveth tithes, paid tithes in Abraham. So those that were receiving tithes have already paid their tithes. It says, for he was yet in the loins of his father. So first and foremost, Levi came way down the line from Abraham, right? Because you had Abraham, then you had Isaac, then you had Jacob, and then Levi was one of Jacob's sons. So Abraham would be his what? Great-grandfather or great-grandfather. Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's his daddy, his grandfather, great-grandfather. So he was his great-grandfather way up the line, right? And it says that he had already paid those tithes because he was in the loins of his father. He was in the loins of his father when his father was paying those tithes. Go ahead.
If therefore perfection were by the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need was there that another priest should rise after the order of Melchizedek and not be called after the order of Aaron?
So he was like, if that was perfect, mind you, that was how the people received the law. Our people didn't have Bibles. Didn't everybody have a copy of the word that they could go home and, read the word or receive the word as they saw fit. If you were zealous, you had to, receive that ministry from the Levites. There wasn't a copy that everyone could just go and have. It said, but if even despite the, the benefits, so to speak, he said, if that was perfect, what need was there for another priest? What need was there for some kind of other order of priesthood after the order of Melchizedek, as opposed to them just continuing to be out of the seed of Aaron? Go ahead.
For the priesthood being changed, there is made of necessity a change also of the law. For he of whom these things are spoken pertained to another tribe, of which no man gave attendance at the altar.
So it says the priesthood being changed. There is a necessity, a change of the law. Actually, I'm sorry. Let's hold right there and go to flip over to Hebrews. We're going to stay in chapter 10. I just want to read 1 through 4. Just so that this doesn't get misconstrued as that's all of the law and that's everything that's mentioned. That's specifically talking about the law of sacrifice. Hebrews 10, we're going to read 1 through 4.
Hebrews chapter 10, verse 1. For the law having a shadow of good things to come, and not the very image of the things, can never with those sacrifices. Those sacrifices, which they offer year by year continually, make the comers thereunto perfect.
So he's specifically speaking about the law and of sacrifice, because he's saying the sacrifices, they should have made the, year by year continually, they should have made the comers thereunto perfect. Basically what happened was, so our law is split into about 5 categories, right? Moral laws, civil laws, dietary, ceremonial, and sacrificial. So every category of law kind of has its own ordinances and its own specificity, things that it focuses on. The sacrificial law, being in its name, was obviously the law of sacrifices. So he was saying that law was a shadow of good things to come, and not the very image of those things. It was a shadow of things. We know that a shadow isn't exactly what something is. It's more so a resemblance. And what that shadow was, or rather what that thing was that our people would live according to faith, not according to that sacrifice. The sacrifices were so, say a man, you had instances that with the scriptures being abridged, it's not, at least I don't always all the way understand, like with Judah and the harlot, right? I was like, man, if Judah's a righteous man, now that story ended up working out. Yeah, she ended up being his daughter-in-law, right? Or previously his daughter-in-law, because his son had passed, and she was awaiting for someone to take on the duty to her brother's wife to continue on her husband's lineage. It ended up not happening. She takes things into her own hands. She dresses as a harlot. Judah comes into the city, and she ended up being, lying with him, and she ends up pregnant. I was like, oh man, that ends up working. But I was like, you was about to just, you know what I'm saying? Like, you was about to just leave with that harlot? Like, what happened? You know what I'm saying? But the scriptures don't really go into that outside of it's being mentioned as that part of the story, so you can understand how they came together. But essentially, if there was some instance of something like that, a man would have had to have offered a sacrifice according to the severity of the sin. And there were different types of sacrifices, right? There was a sacrifice for sins. There was free will offerings. You just decide to offer something up to the Most High. There was, and it wasn't always even limited to meat, but there were just a number of different things, right? But basically, when it's talking about the law of sacrifice, specifically talking about sin, because that's when a sacrifice was required, right? If a man had committed adultery and say he was to offer an ox, well, a man with 300 oxen would look at that and say, well, I used one ox, I get to go do that 299 more times. But that wasn't the mentality that our people were supposed to be taking on, and that wasn't the faith that they were supposed to be living by. Ultimately, you're supposed to have an understanding as someone in that position. The wages of sin is death, right? Continuing on in sin can lead to death. But even certain sins, you only had to do them one time and it was death, right? So you were supposed to have an understanding watching that animal die and seeing that blood sprinkle onto the ground, that animal had literally taken your place. That that person who had committed adultery was literally worthy of death, but because of the mercy of the Most High, that animal was able to die, And then that man gets to live so that he may reform his ways and continue to walk in the faith, hopefully to get better. Ideally, to never do it again. But our people didn't have that mentality. They weren't walking with that faith. It just became more of a transactional kind of thing. Well, I got 50 ox. I can go commit adultery like 35 times and still have enough ox to, to get a good amount of yield during springtime and still be able to do that. And that's not what it was supposed to be. So he said, obviously, those sacrifices can never with those sacrifices which they offered year by year continually make the comers thereunto perfect. Go ahead.
For then would they not have ceased to be offered?
Because he was like, wouldn't they have stopped? If the people were coming with that level of fear, that's what it really, that level of fear. You see that animal die because it was a specific way they had to kill the animal, right? They had slit the throat. You see the blood leave out. You like, dang. You see the, I believe it was T. He spoke about, when they slaughtered the lamb for Passover. It was a spiritual experience. You watch, you watch the blood. You watch it take its last breath. It's like, man, it's a very spiritual and powerful moment, right? That's what our people were supposed to be experiencing every time they had to go offer a sin offering. Seeing that animal die. Some animals, they don't go quietly. They make a noise, right? They, just all these different things that go into death. They're making a noise. If it kicks and, and moves, seeing its eyes, the fear or the, all those kind of things. Being able to see that for someone who wants to walk in faith should say, oh my goodness, look at that. And not only is it that this life had to be slaughtered or taken so that I could live, but that ultimately that should have been me. I'm the one who sinned, not this ox, not this whatever animal it had to be. I'm the one who is guilty of that death. And that should have put the fear in that man or that woman to say, you know what, I'm not going to do that anymore. On top of that, I kind of understood the law, but now I really see it's a sacrifice. Something's got to die every time someone sins. All right, I'm going to stop doing that. And eventually, Israel, through that man, that woman, they teach their children, who teach their children, so on and so forth, who offer less sacrifices and become more perfect in the law. And eventually, there shouldn't have been any more sacrifices. Go ahead.
Because that the worshipers, once purged, should have had no more conscience of sin.
That shouldn't have been something that they continued on doing. That should be out of them, right? Go ahead.
But in those sacrifices, there is a remembrance again made of sins every year. For it is now possible that the blood of bulls and of goats should take away sin.
Then he says, it's not possible that the blood of bulls and of goats should take away sin. That's literally not even possible. And the Most High said, the scriptures say obedience is better than sacrifice. I always say it like, you got a woman that's doing you wrong. She do you dirty. Do the unthinkable. Cross just lines with you. And she brings you a gift, right? She bring you like a nice watch or something. And then the next time she do it, you're like, oh, man, what happened? Like, oh, babe, I got tangled up and all this other kind of stuff. It's never going to happen again. You're like, oh, man, that hurt. But, maybe we can find a way to move forward. I'm just using this as an example. Then the next time she buy you some Jordans, you're like, oh, babe, this is nice. What this from? I messed up again. You're like, oh, all right. But then it's like, how many times, your whole house gets filled with gifts. And you know that each one is really just a guilt offering that this person, every time that you wear this, maybe you wear that nice watch one time, you be like, man, that ain't too bad. That, people have gotten less for offenses like that. And then you keep going, and you got these nice clothes, and people gonna compliment you. Oh, fly guy, yeah, I'm trying to get like you. But in your mind, you understand that these gifts were only given out of guilt. And these gifts are literally tokens of admission of guilt for someone that did you wrong. Eventually, you're not going to care about looking good. Eventually, you're not going to care about how people are perceiving you and how these carnal gifts make you feel and look. Eventually, it's just going to be a reminder. You're not even going to want those things. I don't even want this. Well, I don't want these shoes. I don't want all these gifts. Because ultimately, it just shows that you were unfaithful. It ultimately just shows that you haven't even regarded me or considered me outside of when it was time to bring me something. And that's the way that the Most High was saying they should have, those gifts should have stopped. But that's why he said there's a remembrance of those sins made every year by those gifts. Most High could see, smell that savor and see those things continue to be offered. Like, damn, when they gonna get it right? When they gonna slow it down? What's going on? Let's pick it up at verse 12. Hebrews 7 and 12.
Verse 12, for the priesthood being changed, there is made of necessity a change also of the law. For he of whom these things are spoken pertained to another tribe, of which no man gave attendance at the altar.
So he said, of he whom these things are spoken of. So when we're speaking about Melchizedek, right? We're speaking about the king of righteousness, the king of Salem, the king of peace. He said, of these things which are spoken of pertains to these things are spoken pertaining to another tribe, of which no man gave attendance at the altar. You couldn't just be any old body going up into the temple. You couldn't be any old body trying to teach the children of Israel. You couldn't be any old body trying to be a judge. And you definitely couldn't be any old body trying to be at the altar. There were people in Israel's history that made that mistake. There were those that spoke out against Moses. Most High put him to death. You had the Ark of the Covenant only to be touched and dealt with by Levites. It was a man, he was walking on the side of the wagon. We can only speculate. Well, was it, why did he touch the Ark of the Covenant? I believe the scriptures say he saw it wobble or something like that. He tried to catch the Ark of the Covenant, died instantly, just bam. It was like, man, we can only speculate. Well, maybe in his heart, he really wanted to touch it. And when he saw the opportunity, but you don't know that for sure. We know one thing, when the Most High says he was going to do something, he was serious about it. That's not to be taken lightly. What other instances? I thought of one more specifically that I want to say. Even Aaron's sons, right? When they had offered the wrong incense, it said they had burned strange fire. I was like, I don't know if they was trying to spruce it up. They thought the temple would smell nicer if we burned a little bit of this, they thought it was a little razzle-dazzle or whatever the case may be. They got put to death. It said the fire came off the incense. And that's what's mind-blowing because, an incense doesn't have an active flame, not like a candle. It just has that little hot spot, that little bit of ember in a sense. And it said, fire came out and consumed them, killed them. So he was like, man, out of all these things that were spoken of, they pertain to another tribe, which no man gave attendance at the altar. Judites weren't priests, right? All the other tribes, Reuben, Simeon, not Reuben, Simeon, Judah, Ephraim, go on and on and on. They were not priests. They didn't have that office, and they weren't allowed to be in that seat. But it says, but these things are being spoken of a man that's of another tribe. Verse 14.
For it is evident that our Lord sprang out of Judah, of which tribe Moses spake nothing concerning priesthood.
They said, because it's evident that our Lord sprang out of Judah. He was of the tribe of Judah. Moses didn't say anything about Judah having some level of priesthood or, right now it's going to be Levi, but eventually we're going to have a high priest, and that wasn't what, he was like, we don't see that. We don't see that being spoken of, that someone else was going to come. But this is all speaking of Yahushua, who came out of the tribe of Judah. Read verse 15.
And it is yet far more evident, for that after the similitude of Melchizedek, there ariseth another priest, who is made not after the law of a carnal commandment, but after the power of an endless life.
But after the power of an endless life. Keep reading.
For he testifieth, thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek.
And who did he speak that about? About David in Psalms, right? When we read earlier in 76. Go ahead.
For there is verily a disannulling of the commandment going before the weakness and unprofitableness thereof.
So a disannulling of the commandment going before the weakness and unprofitableness, right? So speaking of the law of sacrifice, right? Go ahead.
For the law made nothing perfect, but the bringing in of a better hope did, by the which we draw nigh unto God.
He said, because the law didn't make anything perfect. Again, not speaking of the law of the Lord in its entirety, every single one of those things, because first and foremost, what we read in Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews chapter 9 and 10 give an understanding of that sacrificial law no longer being in effect, but Yahushua, who the world knows as Jesus Christ, being that sacrifice once for all. Then after that, there's no more constant sacrifices for sins. You saying you have to repent, prayer and fasting and repentance. That's the difference. Living after faith, actually choosing to change your ways is the way now. It's just not going to be constant sacrifices and offerings. But, you know, the scriptures say that the law is perfect, because he says, for the law made nothing perfect. But the scriptures say the law is perfect, right? Mm-hmm. Making wise is simple. It causes a man to change his ways. It does these things for us. And I always say, you know, if we look into our communities, even in the problems that we have within Israel that knows they're Israel, there's not one problem that the law doesn't solve or give insight on or give understanding to. So many issues that arrive in marriages. Well, someone's not keeping, you know, like the scriptures say, where there's contention, or only by pride cometh contention. Someone's being prideful, right? And it's not something as simple as, you know, y'all talking about dinner. One says steak, one says salmon, and y'all having a conversation. Oh, someone's prideful. That's not what it's talking about. But when you're talking about the power struggle, scriptures are clear, right? The man is the head over the woman. And it doesn't even say that, you know, it isn't like, because some men will take that, I'm the head, I'm the strong, I'm supposed to, you just got to listen to me, you better not ever talk back, and this and that, or don't question me, even if it's out of sincerity. And it's like, but the scriptures also say, don't be a lion in your own house. There's the balance in the law, right? The perfection of the law. There's the commandment, and there's the balance. You have order as far as how a woman should deal with her husband. You know, as far as it being, she's supposed to be obedient unto him like unto Christ. But then it goes, I believe, either right before or right after that, saying that husbands should love their wives as Christ loved the church. Because ultimately, when you have all these power struggles and these dynamics, you know, there's somewhere in the law that would have already solved that. A man being too abrasive, he being super extra aggressive and, you know, really causing offenses, really just breaking his wife's heart. Well, you're not supposed to be a lion, and you're supposed to love your wife like Christ loved the church. Well, that shows and simplifies. Because as much as Christ could have easily been walking around smiting people, right? Who had more right to be a judge in Israel than Christ? There was no sin. Woman came to him, they caught her in adultery. They said, in the very act, we know she did it. And he was like, all right, he could have easily been like, all right, no one can, he could have easily been like, all right, string her up and deal with her according to the law. The scriptures say this and that. Yeah, all right, kill her this way. He didn't do that. He said, all right, well, whoever of y'all hasn't sinned, you can be the first one to throw a stone. Slowly but surely, everybody walked away. And then he didn't take that opportunity to pick up a stone. Then he said, all right, I'm going to give you this opportunity. Don't do it again. Is that not love? That's love. Hella compassionate, right? Very understanding, very long-suffering. So when you see those things, there's order and there's understanding in the scriptures. You see the dynamic of the woman who, that's not a marriage lesson. I'm not going to stay on this too hard, but I'm just about to speak on this because, you know, these things have been being talked about a lot lately. You have, the woman that, her husband has desires and she got a headache every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right? Well, the scriptures say the woman don't have power over her own body, and neither does the man power over his own body. Right? You want to separate, or you have to take that space, whatever the case may be. Don't do it so long that Satan gets an opportunity in your, I believe the word is concupiscence, which is like a desire. You get to a point where you can't contain yourself, and people make mistakes. It says, don't let it get to that point. So there's so much balance and so much understanding, in so much that, there's laws about how we're supposed to conduct ourselves, even in matters of offenses, or, you offend your brother, you're supposed to go and talk to him. Shouldn't be nobody holding a grudge in Israel. Also, if your brother offends you, you're supposed to go talk to him. So you're not supposed to hold something and have an issue with somebody. You just sitting up there around them, but you really can't stand them. Talk to them. Let them know, hey, you know what, this I don't feel like this was right. I feel like this was an offense. But he said, that the law made nothing perfect, speaking of that sacrificial law, right? Speaking of that law of sacrifice, because ultimately those people should have been made perfect. He's like, man, it didn't make anything perfect. It really did nothing. Nothing was made to the level that the Most High had intended through that law. Or excuse me, how should I say? The people were not made perfect the way the Most High intends for us to walk through that law, because, like I said, it was more transactional. In the same way you got a whole bunch of money, you can go do whatever you want to. You want to buy a burger, you can buy $10,000, $83 each. You could buy 3,000 burgers. You got all this time. People were doing that kind of thing with the law of sacrifice and sin, just constantly offering it, and it meant nothing. Go ahead, verse 19.
For the law made nothing perfect, but the bringing in of a better hope did, by the which we draw nigh unto God. Inasmuch as not without an oath he was made priest. For those priests were made without an oath, but this was an oath by him that said unto him, the Lord sweareth and will not repent. Thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek.
It says, and insomuch as not without an oath. As not without an oath, he was made priest, right? So there was also an agreement made with Melchizedek, with the Most High Yahweh Shai. Go ahead.
By so much was Jesus made a surety of a better testament. And they truly were many priests, because they were not suffered to continue by reason of death.
And he said there were many priests because they weren't able to continue. There wasn't, there would be a high priest in Israel for however long that he was going to be high priest. Obviously, that was not only just a high-ranking position, but I would imagine a stressful job. He's got to always be clean, got to be holy, got to make sure. And you have to imagine, at the time where Israel really had a temple and a tabernacle to be able to go to, and no one could be unclean, the high priest entering into the Holy of Holies had to really make sure he was clean, really make sure he knew his schedule. You can't, you ever had a mistake, you wake up late going to work, or you mess around and be done miss today because you're like, oh, snap, I'm so late, I might as well. High priest can't make no mistake like that. He can't make those kinds of things. But it said they were only priests up until they had died, and then there would have to be another high priest and someone else to take their place, and so on and so forth. Go ahead.
23?
24.
But
Actually,
this,
I'm sorry, you can read. Start at 23.
and they truly were many priests, because they were not suffered to continue by reason of death. But this man, because he continueth ever, hath an unchangeable priesthood.
So it says, they were many priests because they weren't able to continue because of death. They weren't going to be priests once the time came that they died. They were high priests or priests up until that point. Then somebody else had to, move up and take that position, and so on and so forth. But it said, but this man, because he continueth ever, meaning he's gonna continue forever, hath an unchangeable priesthood. His priesthood is not going to change. It's not going to be as the Levitical priesthood where, there's going to be some mystery man or a mystery priest or things that have not been spoken of. It said his priesthood is going to continue forever. Go ahead.
For such an high priest became us, who is holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and made higher than the heavens, who needed not daily, as those high priests, to offer up sacrifice, first for his own sins, and then for the people's. For this he did once, when he offered up himself.
So it says, for such an high priest, holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and made higher than the heavens. This man, Melchizedek, right? It says he doesn't need to daily offer as those other high priests to offer a sacrifice. Excuse me. It said first for his own sins. So the high priest would have to offer an offering because the Most High was like, Most High didn't want to even deal with the high priest if he had some sin. So first he had to offer a sacrifice for his own sin to make sure that he was clean. Then he would be clean enough to offer a sacrifice on behalf of the other people. But the scriptures are saying it's not going to be like that with Melchizedek. It's not going to be like that where he has to offer up a sacrifice or he has to offer up daily. It said, for this he did once when he offered up himself, right? Who offered himself for the sins of Israel? Yahweh Shai. Let's get that real quick. Go to Acts chapter 5. 5 started 30 and 31.
Acts chapter 5, verse 30. The God of our fathers raised up Jesus, whom ye slew and hanged on a tree. Him had God exalted with his right hand to be a prince and a savior, for to give repentance to Israel and forgiveness of sins.
So this Jesus, who, right, in the Hebrew, Yahawashi, it said, him hath the Most High God exalted with his right hand to be a prince and a savior, for to give repentance to Israel and forgiveness of sins. That was the purpose of his life and his sacrifice, for to give repentance to Israel and forgiveness of sins. Not so that Israel could continue on in sin and everything be taken care of. That's what the Christians are taught, right? Yahawashi died, and I mean, that literally makes, but that mentality literally makes no sense, because why would the Most High have taught Israel the law, have had such a detailed law? I mean, the law is very detailed. There are very, very, very specific things. There is a way that you're supposed to build your house. On the roof, you had to have like railings so that people couldn't go up there and fall. You had ways that you had to deal with mold on the walls or growth on the walls or leprosy. That's what was called a leprosy in the house. What the world knows now is vitiligo. A man having that blotch on his skin. His melanin is leaving. There was a specific way he had to be dealt with. There was even a law that I always am fascinated by, because it kind of has to do with survival, that says that you can't take a bird and its eggs in the same day. You have to either take the bird and you're going to eat the meat, or take the eggs and you're going to eat the eggs, but you can't take it all at the same time. I was like, man, how specific, and how, I feel like overlooked. And for us to be pilgrims, and what could very quickly and very soon become a reality, that's the type of stuff that we need to make sure that we know, because somebody's going to be out there and be like, oh, man, look, a bird and some eggs. We hit the jackpot, kill both, and be like, that was a sin. It was? You know what I'm saying? That seems simple, but the Most High has already had a detailed law in showing these are the things that are to be, and these are how things are supposed to be set up. So I just say, like, why would the Most High set up those laws? Why would he set up these things so intricately and assure that they were taught to the children of Israel? Fathers and mothers to their sons and daughters, priests to the people, prophets to the people and to kings, and then to have put so many people to death for a violation of that law, to have put people to death for rebelling against leadership that was about that law and teaching people that law, living by that law, only to offer Christ as a sacrifice and then just allow anything at this point. That literally makes no sense. It says forgiveness of sins. What was already done was able to be forgiven through Yahawashi's sacrifice, so that Israel now has a chance to get it right. Living by faith now. Not saying, okay, we can just make a transaction. All right, here, I committed adultery. Here go your ox. All right. Oh, but you got to live by faith. Get better and better and better. Continue to increase. Offer your body as a living sacrifice. But there was a specific thing he said in Hebrews. Let's go to, because he said he was going to be established forever. Let's go to Isaiah chapter 9. Two more scriptures, and then we're going to finish this out. Isaiah chapter 9, we're going to read 6 and 7.
Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and a government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace.
The Prince of Peace. Go ahead.
Of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end, upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth, even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this.
It said even forever, right? The zeal of the Lord forever. So literally when it's speaking of Christ, he's going to be that king, ruling in judgment, ruling in righteousness, that's going to reign and rule forever. The King of Kings, right? And his throne is going to be established eternal. It's not going to be something that, like the other kings that, come and go, or whatever the case may be, they reigned for this many years and slept with their fathers. That's not going to be the case. Stay in Isaiah. Flip over to chapter 7 and read verse 14.
Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel.
So it's speaking, right? So we're speaking of this government, and we're speaking of this virgin who is going to conceive, and this child whose name is going to be called Emmanuel. Let's flip over to Matthew. Matthew chapter 1. And I want you to read, start at verse 21.
The book of Matthew, chapter 1, verse 21. And she shall bring forth a son, and thou shalt call his name Jesus, for he shall save his people from their sin. Now all this was done, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, Behold, a virgin shall be with child, and shall bring forth a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel.
So it says, now this it was done that it might be fulfilled. So we just saw that in Isaiah, right? That it was going to be, that this child was going to be called Emmanuel, right? This same that was spoken of, that he was going to have judgment. Hold on, let me go back to Isaiah real quick so I make sure I get that right. That was Isaiah 9:6. Just real quick, I'm going to read it real quick. It says, of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end. So we're speaking of the priesthood. It said that this man was going to have no end to his priesthood because the other priests were prevented by death. This priest was not going to be prevented by death. Said that he was going to be a ruler of the people, and of his kingdom, of his government, there's not going to be an end. Upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth, even forever. So of his reign and of his government, there's not going to be an end. And then when you come back to Matthew 1, it said, now this was done that it may be fulfilled, which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, Behold, a virgin shall be with a child, and shall bring forth a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which being interpreted is, God is with us. So this was that child that was being spoken of in Isaiah. And who was this? Jesus. This was Yahweh Shai, right? Jesus Christ. So of his priesthood and of his government, his authority as a king, it's never going to end. It's going to be eternal. Let's get the last scripture, Isaiah chapter 53. Isaiah chapter 53, and let's read 1 through 7.
Isaiah chapter 53, verse 1. Who hath believed our report, and to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of a dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him.
So it said that, he wasn't a looker, so to speak. That's just really straight up what that's saying. He wasn't a looker. It said that when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. People, it's like, that's what I'm saying. If somebody, you get some old, that's oftentimes how Israel does, right? Even Samuel the prophet, right? The Most High sent him to Jesse, who was King David's father. Most High told Samuel, all right, go to this house in this place. There's you going to find the king of Israel. So Jesse, who was King David's father, he bring out one of his sons. Samuel's like, man, that got to be him. Big old dude. He probably had a big old beard, all super yoked up. He like, oh, that's got to be him. He looks like a king. So much of Israel has that. And the Most High was like, Samuel, that ain't him. He said, I don't see as you see. You see him and that's why the scriptures say the Most High, Yahweh Shai, don't judge a man based off of, he's no respecter of persons. He don't fear no man that he should have a respecter of persons. Somebody might get before a man like that and be like, oh man, this is a big dude. Whether it be out of fear of what he could do, or whether it be because you feel he commands a certain level of respect, people will start to sway into, as the scriptures say, trim their ways for love, looking for that certain level of approval to the point where they'll do things differently between one man and another. But the Most High was like, I don't see that. Like, I don't see man as you see man. That's not who I chose. And I think that was one of the reasons, that was probably one of the reasons why people were so insulted with Yahweh Shai's doctrine. Not only is he bold, not only is he contradicting so much of what Israel was being taught through the Pharisees and Sadducees by tradition, not only was he a man of his word and of an outstanding character, but they didn't really have nothing physical that they desired about him. They wasn't really trying to look for him and double taking and all that kind of stuff. But then when he spoke, it was like you had to listen. Go ahead.
He is despised and rejected of men.
Despised and rejected. People hated him. Rejected of men. People didn't want to, everybody sitting down, they talking. They don't want him to sit down. They don't want him to talk. They didn't want to hear what he had to say. They didn't respect him. Go ahead.
A man of sorrows and acquainted with grief.
That was it's like, man, a man of sorrows. A lot of problems, a lot of things that he experienced. And I wonder, because the scriptures were abridged, how many experiences maybe that we didn't necessarily see. Because it's not like we see Christ as a little bitty baby getting whooped because, he was crying or go sit down. We don't see those moments that we know are common in Israelite households. And on Christ's 13th birthday, his mother made his favorite omelet. Like, we don't see that. But, he was acquainted with sorrow. Acquainted, like, sorrows. Those things, right? Acquainted with griefs. Salaki, go ahead.
And we hid as it were our faces from him.
Didn't even want to look at him. Hid their faces from him. Yeah, I mean, man, have you ever been in that position where somebody hiding their face, like, man, like, oh, you feel some type of way. Go ahead.
He was despised and was esteemed, and we esteem him not.
They didn't even think didn't think anything of him. Him? Man of the Most High, man. The Christ. It's like, man, it must have been, but look at all the things that he did. So look at this, right? There were those that loved him. There were those that admired him. There were those that even in the earthly realm acknowledged his position as the Christ, respected him, and were taught of him and humbled themselves to him. But there were many, 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 many more that hated him, that rejected him, that didn't regard him, that didn't even acknowledge him, didn't esteem him worth anything, didn't care for him at all. Go ahead.
Surely he had borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted.
It says, surely he was the one who was carrying the griefs and the sorrows of Israel. He was going through things for Israel's sake. All the things that he had gone through. It said he was moved with compassion with the people. When he separated himself to go fast, when he separated himself to pray, when he separated himself to be strengthened and to be ministered unto by the angels. All the things that he was going through because he chose to bear the griefs and the iniquities and the, everything from Israel. It says, yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God. They was like, man, I'm pretty sure there were people that was like, man, ain't no way he's righteous. Look at what he going through. Don't people say that? People oftentimes do get caught up on a man having money, him being a good looker, him being a number of these different things that people would esteem as godliness. But that wasn't so with the King of Kings. That wasn't so with Yahweh Shai. Said people considered him to be smitten of God. They like, oh, he can't be nobody. Look at him. Look at his situation. You think the Most High is with him? Woo. But this was the King of Kings. This is Yahweh Shai. Very well was the Most High with him. And afflicted. Go ahead.
But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed.
And look what that's saying. He was wounded for our transgressions. For all the wrong that we had done as a nation, we had done as a people, we do as individuals. He had to take that on. He had to be held responsible. He had to bear that weight. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him. And with his stripes, we are healed. You ever, that kind of makes me think of, because, I like to kind of visualize things. There are certain like superheroes, but oftentimes there's super villains that literally get life by taking the life of someone else. There's one of them, oh man, I want to say like he's Batman's villain. Like he got to touch somebody, and that person gets all old and withers up. And, they be looking like a raisin when he's done, and then he gets like 20 years younger. You know what I'm talking about? Basically, I just visualize that kind of stuff because literally that's in essence, what was happening? Yahweh Shai was being wounded and being hurt so that Israel could be healed. He was the one that he is the one that gave his life so that we could have an opportunity of repentance. Through his blood, and that blood didn't come easy. He had to be wounded. He didn't have no good time while he was down here on earth, and he's the King of Kings. He could have easily been like, man, I don't want to do this. For them, he could have easily been like, man, these no good niggas. Look how they talking to me. Look how they dealing with me. He walking down bearing his cross. After all of these things, after being rejected, not esteemed, people hiding their face, he like, hey, what's going on, y'all? Here come this nigga. You know how y'all know how Israel do. Hey, here he comes. Hey, everybody gonna turn and act like they don't see him. Like, damn, the King of Kings. Man, they dealing with him like that. And after all those years, what easily could have been decades of him getting treated like that by the very people that he was there to save. Ain't nothing worse than when you want to do something for somebody, right? And they treating you like that. You like, look, man, I'm trying to do something for you. Be an insult. You pick somebody's wallet, pick a lady wallet up. Excuse me, miss, I have a boyfriend. You like, man, keep this. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm going to keep this. Appreciate you. All right. I'm about to go do me. Yahweh Shai didn't take that approach. People, man, and then after everything he did, when it was his time to die, and he was betrayed, and it's his time to die, he walking, they hitting him, smiting him, spitting in his face, mocking him, blindfolded him and hit him. Oh, tell us who prophesied, who hit you? Like, oh, man. Acquainted with grief, afflicted. It says, but through his stripes we are healed. Verse 6.
All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all.
And the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. All the things that we did. All the mistreatment that we deserved. All the stuff that we should have experienced. All the heartbreak and anguish and disrespect and being omitted, being counted out, being regarded as nothing, not being esteemed. All these things that we have done, Most High laid on him. Verse 7.
He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth.
And he didn't even complain. He went before Pontius Pilate, and I believe Pontius Pilate and Caesar, they were sending him back and forth. They became friends through sending him back and forth. Oh, man, what a crazy story that was. Look at these Jews. Like, man, but he was just that's his life. He being walked back and forth. Everybody just waiting. People just, and must have either been following him or already been there to call for his death. And then all these things, they're like, these are the accusations being brought up against you. What do you say? Thou sayest. That's what hey. You got it. Shh. He still didn't open up his mouth. He didn't complain. He could have easily, man, you no good, ungrateful. He didn't hit none of that. Go ahead.
He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is dumb, so he opened not his mouth.
As a sheep before her shearers. If you ever, YouTube, that's one of the dope things about technology and YouTube and all that kind of stuff. It gives you a lot of insight in lives that you don't have to live, and a lot of insight in things that you don't have to experience. So, sheep, obviously, what is it called? Blatten? Like, they do that, right? Mm-hmm. But they don't do that while they're getting sheared. If you ever see a sheep while it's getting sheared, they'll be quiet the whole time. It would be the most, I guess, talkative, so to speak, sheep. And then when they're getting sheared, they're quiet. And then as soon as the shear lets them go, they hop up, they be all clean shaven, bad, they get right back to it. But while they're right there with them clippers, they don't say nothing. So it said Yahweh Shai was that same way. So he's worthy of the title and the respect that he's been given. He's worthy of that eternal rulership and leadership as the King of Kings. He's worthy of that kingdom. Look at his sacrifice. Look at the things that he did. Look at the things that he bared for other people. Sometimes people are willing to, people don't respect someone that's not willing to get it out the mud for themselves. But imagine you going through all that and it's for everybody else. But did you have anything you wanted to add? But that was the lesson, Israel. I hope this was edifying. I hope it brought some understanding. I know, there were a lot of different kind of little aspects that I touched on, but I hope it all tied together well and gave some understanding. This has been another edition of Bible Basics. Hopefully, please continue to tune in with us throughout the week, as there are other topics, other things that we go into, other classes that are definitely useful and edifying. We hope this one was edifying as well. And with that, we say shalom.
Shalom.